the Lord of the Rings is full of amazing doors. But to me, there's one undisputed top door. Now, is this mostly an excuse to sculpt a giant octopus monster and spend a mortgage down payment on resin? For the walls of Moria, as well as the wet backyard of Moria, we'll start with a handful of slabs of XPS foam. The doors need to be thin enough to where we can cut an Elvish instruction manual out of it for light to shine through. So let's start by slicing a gate-sized hole straight through the wall, then taper the edges for a smoother transition. Now, go watch about 15 hours of German grandpas building train set terrain on YouTube to become the secret wielder of making okay-looking rock surfaces.
How was he? 10 hours straight. He's a machine.
This forbidden technique starts by scoring the foam both horizontally and vertically, then using your finger tools to pick off the resulting cubes. While you will lose all physical sensation in your fingertips after a while, the result looks surprisingly good. To soften out the sharpest edges and add a bit more texture, grab our trusted old friend and smack the foam with it a bunch. Remember those foam slabs from earlier? Of course you do. Classic slabs. Now use the world's dullest scalpel and the markings from earlier to start carving out our lake bed. We also need to dig out a bit of a path for the patio of Moria before we can start gluing all the bits together. The main attraction of Durin's entryway are the magical fruit-activated doors. I'm whispering this part to not ruin this spicy moment for my ASMR freaks out there. We need a transparent back wall to... Oh, is ASMR time over? We need a transparent back wall to build the gate on that will still let light through, which is a perfect job for
overpriced acrylic sheet.
To make said light be a bit more diffused, we'll give it a quick once-over with some medium grit sandpaper. I'll use a marker to mark the opening in the middle of... Okay, that's not even remotely in the middle. Can I just nudge it over? Okay, that's better. I was pretty happy with myself when I thought of the idea to sketch the door pattern on top of my iPad, a short-lived joy as every time you accidentally touch the screen, you'll click some random link to parts of the internet you really hope didn't exist. Oh! It did, however, end up kind of working, and we can now glue the whole thing to the back of the wall slab. I've finally gotten hold of a back of Sculptamold, which I've seen so many other craftspeople on YouTube use for their terrains. It's basically a chunky, plastery powder that if you don't add enough water to before mixing, it also emits this awesome dust that I'm sure is great for my lungs and overall life expectancy.
I'm in danger!
My initial idea was to use the Sculptamold to not only blend the wall into the backplate, but also to build the stone parts between the door pattern holes, if that makes sense. I did, however, quickly realize that the chunks in the goop are way too big to give that level of detail, and I've now also smudged out the pattern that I painstakingly drew earlier, so that's also cool.
I can't do anything right.
But do you know what has never failed me? Clay. Well, that's not really true. It has failed me on many occasions, but at least in more expected, manageable, and self-inflicted ways. Let's use a piece of baking paper to trace a few landmarks from our old busted door plan to get the right-ish scale and placement. To avoid another iPad debacle, I used my actual eyeballs this time to connect the dots and sketch the door anew from reference. I'm not much of a good drawer, but I think it came out okay.
This is terrible. Really?
I flattened some clay into door-appropriate thickness, then after using my beautiful baking sheet art to transfer the drawing onto the surface of the clay, we can start the arduous process of cutting out all the little pattern parts. After a quick bake in the oven, we'll start the even more arduous process of cutting loose all the little bits, as well as cleaning up their edges so that the light can get through properly. Now, through a bit of raw Gandalf magic, we can reassemble everything. And by magic, I just mean like a lot of time, superglue, and tweezer-induced hand cramps. Now let's mix up another batch of our forbidden cottage cheese to build a more natural transition between the foam strata. In a rare moment of wisdom, I decided to save the bits we picked off of the foam wall earlier, which can now serve as extra rock detail. Let's do the same to the transition between the wall and the clay gate, before finally attaching the wall to the rest of the terrain and setting the whole thing aside to harden overnight. Treebeard is one of the coolest parts of Lord of the Rings, but before I can deem myself worthy of sculpting the granddaddy of bark himself, I must first prove myself on these boring inanimate trees. We'll start by folding an amount of equal length armature wire based on the number of branches we want the tree to have, then snip them apart at the bends. Now, if we just twist and braid the center bit of the bundle to serve as a trunk, that should give us ample sticky outy bits to become branches and roots. We'll use a bit of foil to thicken out the trunk before covering it in a layer of clay. At this stage, I already started being bored of draping long tentacle-looking things. Good thing the rest of the project doesn't have a lot of long tentacle-like parts. No one actually knows what a real tree looks like, so I'm using photos from the internet to add and/or carve tree-appropriate details into the tree. For wood grain, we can just scrape the whole tree lengthwise with a rake tool, before going back over with a sculpting tool to accentuate some of those lines for a bit of variation. When that is finally done, let's have a quick tactical cry before we have to do it all over again.
I'm not crying.
Everyone's favorite cool cousin Balin would never settle for a soft beta wall like this, so we need to add a hardening goop layer by mixing Mod Podge with a veritable dragon's horde of whitish mini paint. Lather it thickly onto the foam rocks to seal them, then for the door, like Wizard Studson would say,
Stipple that goop.
a lake bed is basically just moist dirt and rocks, which we can make by taking dirt and rocks and adding moist to them. Add very exact and meticulously calculated amounts of brown paint for just the right color and mix everything together until you get forbidden cake frosting that's
Not for eating.
Looks like
Goops.
back on the menu, boys.
The path in front of the door should be a bit more rock strewn than the rest, but sadly all I have are big aquarium rocks and very fine sand and nothing really in between, while we wait for more medium-sized stones to arrive in the mail, as going outside to find them is out of the question as there are people there. Let's at least add a few more of those foam rocks where it feels like big rocks would live. As time is a flat circle, the wall goop has now cured and is ready for a base layer of off-white paint.
Hey Lars, it's me Jeff. I brought your new rocks.
Go away, Jeff. You suck.
I know, I'm the worst, haha.
So these turn out to still be a bit smaller than I hoped, but I think they'll just have to do. Hopefully, when everything is painted, it won't look as terrible. After another sizable helping of German grandpa train videos, I landed on a way of painting rocks that starts with adding a lot of wet directly to the rock. While still uncomfortably moist, we can brush on very thinned out gray paint that should now flow into the recesses. It does look pretty bad after the first coat, but maybe after a few more it will be more not bad.
Wow! The land of make-believe!
When that is dry, we can add more wet and dab on random dabs of brownish red for a bit of color variation, followed by a darker brown where dirt would gather. I've broken out the old airbrush to give all of the ground bits a dark brown base coat. I'll also add a layer of dark bluish green to the deepest part of the lake bed in an attempt to fake a bit of depth when the resin is added. A quick grey dry brush later, and I was convinced I was done with this terrain, but I totally forgot we made these things. In my defense, I had put them in a cabinet in our living room, and they had thus stopped existing because object impermanence. I'm using basically the same process as with the wall, an off-white base coat, a smattering of reddish brown where moisture would collect, and oops, too much dark wash. Maybe if I try the exact same thing again, it'll be different. Yeah, nope, still bad. Weird. I threw that whole mix in the trash and made a new thinner grey wash that I brushed all over to darken the sculpted cracks, before topping it all off with a brighter dry brush to highlight the edges. A couple of generous helpings of super glue later, and we can stick these dried out trees in their designated places. To simulate sticks, I bought some sticks.
That is one big pile of
Sticks.
I'll be a stickler about carefully sticking the sticks in specific places around the diorama before securing them with a drizzle of watered down glue, which is also sticky.
Stick.
Turns out if you didn't plan ahead at all, the bottoms of the trees won't magically fit the ground perfectly, leading to these disgusting gaps.
That's horrible.
To rectify this atrocity, let's mix some rocks with some smaller rocks and a bit of Mod Podge to make a grainy goop to fill the gaps. Then try our best to blend the new additions into the already painted terrain with a series of paints, washes, and dry brushes. Now all we need to do is paint the edges black, and the terrain is actually done. Right now we pretty much just have a waterless pond, which is basically just a hole, and some doors. Mines of Moria, more like Mines of Snoria, am I right? Well, if you thought I'd let this chance to sculpt the beautiful tentacled invertebrate that lives in that lake, then you're a
Fool of a took.
This guy is basically just teeth and tentacles, so let's start with a metal skull to hold the aforementioned octo chompers. Let's also poke a mouth hole into the foil insides before draping the whole thing in an initial dermis of clay. We can then start building up the shapes of the head-body hybrid, starting with a strong brow and beefy lower jawline. The original design also has these flappy bits that I guess are like some kind of gills that everyone knows are definitely gills, as well as being blessed by a set of Cumberbatchian cheekbones.
Hello.
Right now it looks less like the Watcher of the Lake and more like an alien Peter Griffin, but that's okay. That's nothing a row or 5 of Nar teeth would fix, which I've amazingly baked a big sheet of already. We'll add as many as we can possibly fit into our friend's bare gums, before adding a thin layer of face, mouth, skin around them. For eyeballs, I've baked a simple ball of Cosclay that we can slice in half and very simply and easily drop into. We can very easily. That we can super easily just pop into the sockets and squish into place. As usual, I had quite a time trying to place these tiny eyelids on top with my dumb sausage fingers and aging millennial eyesight.
I'm old, Gandalf.
One day I might somehow magically become rich enough to make all these dioramas in 10 times the size, but until that happens, I'll just have to noodle all these tiny bits into place using whatever small sculpting tools I have at hand. Now, what is exciting is that I've basically just been blindly winging the scale of this guy so far, so I'm really hoping our squid friend will actually fit on the terrain. Let's cut up a bouquet of equal length bits of wire for the tentacles and get ready for posing. It was about this point in time when my childlike joy of getting to sculpt a cool monster slowly morphed into a teary-eyed promise to myself to never again make anything with this amount of identical appendages.
I can't do it again.
Much time and a massive podcast backlog later, and all our required flappy calamari tubes are cooked. What I did not remember until now was the concept of gravity, which very rudely made this arm start sagging out of pose. I tried propping it up, but then realized that putting a plastic box in the oven would probably not be the smartest thing I've ever done. I think we'll just have to poke insertion points for each arm and just finish the head part of our daddy long tentacles first, then just superglue the arms into place so everything stays where it's supposed to. Now let's give our friend a generous alcohol bath to take the edge off before this traumatic next part. A pro tip to get softer and more organic surface lines on clay sculpts is to make the marks through a bit of saran wrap. Now, to add a few random bumps and lumps, you can mix isopropyl alcohol with some primo Cosclay and stir until you get this nice thick sludge that you can stipple onto the surface where you want said lumps and bumps, and these will bake just like the rest of the clay.
Leela, what's your favorite thing about the tentacle?
Well, it's actually pronounced Lars, but I guess my answer is that you can get 4 hugs at once. We can use the power of superglue to stick the arm back in its insertion hole, then smear on a healthy coating of bacon bond before filling the gaps with more clay. To make sure it doesn't droop down during baking though, I've devised this highly complicated piece of engineering to prop up this wet death noodle while it's in the oven. The rest of the tentacles can stand up pretty much on their own, so they are just glued in place and blended into the head torso. As soon as our friend has gone from nontopus to octopus, all we need to do is blend the wrinkles from the body into the arm bits, and we are ready for baking.
Really baking? I can bake a real
Squid.
Something I often lament in these character videos is the need to make 2 hands. So imagine my horror when I calculated the math to show that I this time will have to make like a even more big number.
I've never seen so many arms and legs!
Luckily, these hands are at least only 3-fingered, which does add up to 16 fingers I don't have to sculpt. I'm adding some finger tendons to the overside of the hand, while on the underside, instead of the classic suction cups, the watcher sports 2 rows of these frilly bits that I assume contains grabby spiky bits that I'm definitely not going to individually sculpt. It would be weird if our otherwise fairly wrinkled, gnarly friend had the most elegant, smooth, and moisturized hands in all of Middle-earth, so let's add a bit of texture before we shove it onto the noodle stumps, hopefully without smooshing all our sculpting in the process. Then, through the power of editing, the watcher sculpt is done. In the last of many bakes, though, one of the arms did crack a bit at the seams, but we can fix that easily by filling the crack with liquid clay and tossing the whole guy back in the oven for a bit. Which I was rewarded for by now having this arm totally break.
Let this be the hour when we
10 squids together.
Yes!
You got it, Captain from Titanic, but let's first make sure that the flappy bits are posed correctly, hopefully without breaking anything in the process. So I've been spending all the tens of dollars I make from these videos on subscribing to painting Patreons lately, and I think I'm going to try what to me is a new way of painting the skin this time. After a simple black base coat, I'm stippling the whole surface using a pretty gnarled up brush with thin off-white paint. This'll mainly hit the convex shapes and leave the deeper nooks and crevices in the darkness from whence they came. I'll then give the whole thing a quick bright dry brush to highlight the sharpest edges before going to Squid Town with a thick layer of contrast paints. Now, this is my first time using contrast paints, but for a quick combined base coat / wash, I kinda like it. I'm coating all of the skin with whatever this color was, and the ridged tentacle undersides with whatever this one was. The gums get a dark red wash that I also add a bit of to the eyes. The teeth need a yellowish white repaint. Then while those dry, we can highlight the gums with a paler pinkish color. Just like terrifying Squidward shouldn't have hand model hands, I'm guessing he or she probably isn't too big on dental hygiene either, so I'll give the bottoms of the teeth a brownish wash.
My teeth are fine. See?
Now, to be able to say I actually did some actual painting on this project, I'm going back over the whole model, highlighting some of the sculpted details with a lighter green. Last touch for our wet boy is to add some wet to his wet areas like gums and eyes using a bit of gloss varnish, and I guess we're as ready as we'll ever be for the scariest part of this project. Hey fellow kids, do you like Lord of the Rings? No way, me too. Well, now that we're best friends, please do consider liking this video, subscribing if you haven't already, and maybe leaving a nice comment. It really does help a lot. Like, who's your favorite Hobbit? Is Dumbledore just Timu Gandalf? And no, I'm not stretching this out just because I'm terrified of starting the resin part. To keep the sadness syrup from escaping and turning the floor of our apartment into a cool skating rink, we will have to build some containment walls. Took me a while, but after much experimenting, I discovered that hot glue guns work a lot better if you plug them in first. I'm using a healthy amount of glue to hopefully counteract the fact that my foam walls are not even remotely flat. Then an extra layer of super glue between the acrylic sheets to lock them in place. I went onto the cyberspace and sent electronic credits to a guy that lives there to hook me up with a batch of deep pour resin, as well as a huge 18-color set of dyes, of which I will use too. I mixed a few drops of blue and green into part A, as well as a few drops directly onto my new white t-shirt that I astutely decided to use for the first time for this occasion. We'll start with a smaller first batch in hopes that whatever inevitable leaks there are, they'll get mostly plugged up when this resin layer gels.
Next morning.
Like SpongeBob meme guys said, it's been curing overnight, and as we can tell by poking the leftovers, it's now approaching bubblegum thick. And it doesn't look like there are any leaks outside of the mold enclosure.
Liquid, huh?
Okay, so there is a bit of resin outside here, but all in all, it's not really that bad. And as it's already semi-cured, I'm hoping this will have plugged any holes before we go on to do our big boy pour.
It's time.
Now, please do enjoy this eyeball ASMR section of resin being poured. There's no kink shaming in this house. Okay, so it's been curing for the last 2 days, and it looks like it's not a total disaster, which for resin pours is basically a miracle.
This shouldn't be possible.
My biggest struggle with resin project has usually been the demolding, and in my everlasting effort to never learn from my mistakes, I have once again not used any form of mold release. The curing process of the resin also seems to always make the perspex go super brittle. Each of these demolds are probably raising my blood microplastics level by several %, but I guess that's also kind of a superpower.
There's plenty for everybody on the Plastic Man Comedy Adventure Show.
The demold wars had some additional casualties in the form of taking a bunch of the painted sides with it in the process, but we can fix that in a minute. Now, if you were wondering where all the runaway resin from the first pour went, fear not. When the resin cures inside a container like this, science makes it have this outer lip that can get pretty sharp. Now, if only I had something to deal with that.
My old sword, Sting. Here, take it.
Wow, thanks, Bilbo. That seems maybe a little excessive, but it does seem to do the trick. The water looks kind of okay as is, but the crystal clear surface might not be the most realistic considering what's going on. I put another dollar in the coffee cup next to our 56k modem and went back on the internet to order this jar of goop that half the people on there said was amazing and the other half said was distilled evil. So yeah.
Gee whiz, the internet is so positive.
Let's lather on a medium thick layer using a throwaway brush, then use a big gloved finger to dab and poke a bit of wavish texture into it. Speaking of waves, I also added a thick layer around all the squiddly bits popping out of the water, then used the tip of a brush to shape the blobs in as much of a wavy, splashy shape I could manage. So I feel like now that we are best friends, it's okay for me to be a little more vulnerable and tell you about how working on too many water-heavy shows as a VFX artist has resulted in a lot of very specific PTSD triggers, wakes being pretty far up there. At least here I won't get yelled at next morning if it looks bad. Well, I guess there's always the comments section, but at least there the yelling gets engagement for the video, so feel free to give me wake-based feedback right now. No, I'll wait. Okay, let's have a look at what... Oh, God, that's just mean. Okay, I think it's time we all turn another leaf. Then glue that leaf to the ground. I bought a little jar of red leaves that, while like most things in this project are pretty out of scale, does give a little punch of color to the scene that I do enjoy. Now that the wave goop is fully cured, it has also sadly lost all of the frothy, foamy color, so let's use a bit of thin white paint to try to get some of those cool 90s frosted tips back, and we are done and ready for the grand final beauty reveal shots. I'm glad you're here with me here at the end of all things, or at least the end of this video. If you like these Lord of the Rings projects, please do leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and do fill the comments with new Lord of the Rings ideas, as I'm honestly kind of starting to run out. A big heartfelt thanks as always to the legends that support me on Patreon. You guys are the absolute best. A special thanks and royal salute to the noble Salty Cupcake and Zordpoint Narf, a big botanical hug to Nicole, and a warm welcome to Zambella, who just started her own awesome crafting channel here on YouTube, so if you like my brand of nonsense, definitely check it out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again in the next one.